Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the National Press Club. If you haven't already, I'm going to take a moment to ask you to please turn off your cell phones, or at least silence them, because we don't want them going off in the middle of the conference. So I'm Andrea Edney. I am the 111th president of the National Press Club. We are the world's leading professional organization for journalists, and we fight for a free press worldwide. Before we begin today's discussion, I'd like to ask everyone here to take a moment of silence for our colleague, Washington Post contributor Jamal Khashoggi, who at this hour is missing, and if he is still alive, we believe he is in mortal danger. Thank you. You know that journalism is a dangerous business. And we're here to talk about our colleague, Emilio Gutiérrez-Soto, the winner of our 2017 John P. Aubuchon Award for Press Freedom. On my first day at the club as president, way back in January, in my first official act, I called for Emilio's release from the detention center in El Paso. It was at a news conference like this one. Emilio had done nothing wrong. He had committed no crime. His detention was arbitrary and cruel and unbefitting of a great nation like the United States of America. After a massive public awareness campaign that involved members of Congress, including Beto O'Rourke, who is represented here today, our partners in the press freedom and human rights fields, the Bishop of El Paso, Mark Seitz, the National Press Club Journalism Institute, especially staff members Kathy Kiley, and our late friend, Julie Shu, and countless news releases, tweets, webcasts, and news conferences that have produced significant and meaningful coverage. Emilio was freed on July 26th of this year. It took almost 8 months to free him and his son, Oscar. That's 8 months. That's a long time. They walked out of the gates that night to freedom and into the arms of their amazing attorney and advocate, Eduardo Beckett, who's over here to my left. Mr. Beckett, who saved their lives in December by stopping a van that was driving with them to take them over the border to Juarez, Mexico. You can applaud. Absolutely, we should be applauding. Thank you, Eduardo. Mr. Beckett is here with us today, and he is going to update us on the case, which has been a real roller coaster. I'm not sure if that's a legal term, but Eduardo is going to tell us about it. He's going to tell us what happened to Emilio since he got out, how he's doing now. He's going to update us on the most recent legal developments, and he's going to tell us what the future holds for Emilio and how we can help. But first, I'd like to say one more thing. There was somebody else there that night when they left the detention center in El Paso. There was somebody else there who was there to greet Emilio and Oscar when they walked through those gates. That was the press. There were reporters and TV cameras and newspapers, and they were there as they have been every step of the way with Emilio. So a big shout out to Julian Aguilar of the Texas Tribune, who was there that night and who took some amazing photos. All of those people were there because Emilio is one of our own. He's a reporter, and his struggle is real to us. And those people, they wanted to stand by him. The press knows a story when it sees one. Crusading reporter risks life to expose corruption in Mexican military. Brave father saves son in daring escape from violent threats. Honorable man enters America properly and legally declares asylum. Warm and loving family lives American dream operating food truck in College Town. Gritty and determined idealists tough out 8 months in squalid prison. Journalist is freed. Writes for Columbia Journalism Review, accepts prestigious fellowship to University of Michigan. El Paso judge launches personal vendetta aimed at deportation and death of 2 good men. So these are some captions that could describe phases of Emilio's life. You may have heard some of the stories behind some of these statements or these headlines or taglines, but we're going to update you now on the last couple. So please welcome Eduardo Beckett, Emilio's pro bono attorney. Eduardo.
Thank you, Andrea. First, I'd like to thank all of you for coming, and thank the National Press Club and all the press who has always been there from day one. I see this case as a community effort. I could not do it without the help of so many other people. Mr. McCarran, Andrea, Kathy Kiley, Julie Shu, and Margot, I always mess up her name, but Margot, CPJ, and just countless reporters, John, the Washington Post, just so many journalists. I am amazed that I wish that lawyers had that solidarity like you all do. It's amazing to me that the message is, if you mess with one journalist, you mess with all of them, and it doesn't matter what part of the world you're in. Whether you're from Saudi Arabia, or you're from Mexico, or you're working for the Washington Post, I see the solidarity, and Emilio's case stands for that. It stands for the freedom of free speech and the right to be heard and to shine light on corruption. And here we are, 10 years later, still talking about his case. And I know that some of you might say, "What the heck is going on there in Texas?" Because it's even hard for me to wrap my head around. This is a slam dunk case. This is a case I shouldn't even be here. We should have won this case. But here we are again, asking for your help again, because what happened is that we sued the government. And when I say me, it's not just me, right? We also had Rutgers University, which I think Kathy Kiley recruited, and Bill McCarran. So we did a federal habeas, and then we had an amicus, other lawyers that helped us out, and we sued the government. And we won in Texas, in West Texas, on the First Amendment. We sued them for equal protection, violation of due process, the Fifth Amendment. You name it, it was all in the federal habeas case. We sued the government to try to get Emilio and Oscar out, because it was an injustice. They tried to deport him 2017. They didn't care that he would have been killed. The Mexican government would have been advised through just normal deportation proceedings. The Mexican government officials must be notified of anyone that's being deported. Just by normal deportations, Emilio would have been executed right away. I really believe that. So we were able to stop that. And then we also found out, that they were retaliating against Emilio Gutierrez, that the Trump administration, or ICE in particular, I can't say Trump, but I'm saying ICE from Texas, was secretly monitoring, watching Emilio, and there was all these emails, secret emails going around saying, we're going to target that guy, and we're going to find a way to get rid of him, or we're going to shut him down, because Emilio has criticized the process. And so through this litigation, and through a FOIA that Kathy Kiley did, actually, it was the National Press Club who did the FOIA, we discovered, like, hey, here's these secret emails. We can't see everything, but there's something there. And so the federal judge in El Paso was like, well, this is ridiculous that, there's these emails, or is explicit that they're targeting this journalist, and he has done nothing wrong. He has no criminal history, nothing. So anyhow, I know you guys already know about all that, but I think it's relevant to what's happening now. So the federal judge in El Paso said, you will hand over to Mr. Beckett and his legal team those emails from all the ICE officials, all the exchanges. You will give him a copy of unredacted, is what we call the A file, which is his entire file that the government has on Emilio. And we're excited, like, we're going to get all this, documentation that we've been looking for, because we only get parts of it. They redact it. They play games. So finally, we're going to get everything. And what does the government do? They release Emilio on purpose, because they don't want us to have those documents. So then, by then the case comes back. Well, I think I already had, the case comes back, after that, back to El Paso, back to the same judge. And so we had recently we had a hearing. We go in front of the same judge with all this, the background stuff that I'm talking about. And I tell the judge in El Paso, Your Honor, what do you think about this case now that it's come back? You know, we have all this new evidence. We have a letter from the State Department. We got all these country condition reports. We have experts. We got everything. This is a slam dunk case. What do you think, Judge? Would you grant my client asylum? And he says, I haven't read none of that stuff. And to be honest, I don't think you're going to change my mind. And I'm shocked. Says, after all this federal litigation, after all these FOIAs, after all these appeals, and you're telling me that you're going to deny my client asylum when this is a what I call a prototypical asylum case. He meets all the standards. It's government persecution. There's evidence that even our government persecuted him on the First Amendment. You know, so he's fighting two governments: the Mexican government and the U.S. government. And so I'm shocked. So I say, Your Honor, with all due respect, I think you should recuse yourself, or you should grant my change of venue to Michigan. So one of the, as you know, Emilio was awarded a very prestigious fellowship at the University of Michigan, and he's doing great out there. I hope they put the pictures. I have some pictures right there in the corner. I'll pass them around. And Emilio's like a new man. He's got a suit on. He's got a bow tie, hanging out with the University of Michigan president. He's writing. He's getting paid to write. He's hanging out with all these journalists from around the world. I mean, he's a changed guy. And so I tell the judge, Judge, what are we doing here? You should grant this man asylum or change the venue and call it a day. And he says, no, Mr. Beckett, I don't care if you turn blue. I'm not changing venue. So then I say, then he says, if you don't like my decision, appeal me. So he challenged me. I said, sure, I will appeal you. So now it's back on appeal. The change of venue is before the Board of Immigration Appeals, what should have been a routine change of venue. Emilio Gutiérrez-Soto and his son Oscar have moved to Michigan. In most cases, I would say 99.9% when the asylum seeker or the person before a judge, when you move to another jurisdiction, your change of venue is granted for the most part, because it's the judge is like, well, why am I going to make him fly over here? It's inconvenient. Why am I wasting resources when I have hundreds of other cases? No problem. Do your change of venue. Litigate your case in Michigan. But the judge said no. She said, I'm not doing that. And then I said, well, then, Judge, I think you're being biased, because you just told me that you're going to deny this claim, and then you don't want to change venue. Why not? And he says, I have put so much time and resources in this case that I can't do that. I want to keep this case here. So I filed an appeal, and I accused him of being biased, of being a bully, because I really think he's being a bully, because the way these judges, at least in El Paso, some of the judges, right? And I'm going out of my way here because as an officer of the court, we shouldn't talk bad about judges. But in this case, I think what the judge is being a bully, because he likes to speak to me and have conversations with me and the government lawyer, but he doesn't want those proceedings to be transcribed or recorded. And then once we're done talking about very important issues of the case, he'll go back on record, and then he'll try to bully me and say, well, Mr. Beckett, we just spoke about this, correct? And then he'll try to make it seem like I agreed with everything that he said, that we made some kind of agreement that it's okay for the case to stay in Texas, to stay with him, that I have no objections. And so, that we're talking about very serious issues. We're talking about a man's life, a man that if he gets deported is going to be executed, and the judge is playing games. And so I accused him of being a bully. I accused him of being biased. I hope that the Board of Immigration Appeals agrees with me. In addition, when the case was sent back to El Paso to the same judge, one of the things, and I have the decision here to pass around if you all want it, is that the Board of Immigration Appeals ordered the judge and said, you will consider all the new evidence that amicus, State Department, updated country conditions, expert reports that we're able to gather. And so that was an order. And so he has to consider all this new evidence. But in addition to that, as time passes, the world is changing, right, every day, right? And so more journalists are being killed. Things are happening in Mexico, outside of war zone. It's outside of war zone, Mexico is the deadliest country in the world for a journalist. What happened to the other journalists in Saudi Arabia too, which is terrible. So journalists are being attacked. And so I thought it was very important to update the judge. And we were able to get an expert opinion through CPJ, Mexico City, on the mechanism to protect journalists, on the failed mechanism. I say failed because journalists continue to be killed in Mexico with impunity. There's so much corruption. The program, the mechanism doesn't even have resources. And so that's the latest filings that we did before the judge. We said, Judge, we want you to, those pictures that you're seeing, we filed that as exhibits. We said, we want the judge to see, look, here's Emilio doing his fellowship. You shouldn't have this case in Texas anymore. This man belongs in Michigan. And I think that the judge is probably thinking, Mr. Beckett thinks that it'll probably be better for him, for the case to go to Michigan. Well, absolutely. Why should Emilio leave his fellowship? Why should he be coming back to the same judge who denied it, who said he was incredible? So we filed these new expert affidavit from CPJ. We put pictures, we put updated country conditions, and what I'm passing around now is a little response that I got from the government right before I flew in to Washington, D.C. Our government filed a little motion saying, telling the judge basically, Mr. Beckett has no right to update you. Mr. Beckett has no right to present this additional evidence. You should not consider it. So I'm amazed that our government, ICE, because I can't say all the government because there's so many branches, but in particular, Immigration Customs Enforcement, El Paso Division, through their Attorney General Sessions, is still going after Emilio Gutiérrez-Soto and trying to make sure he loses. And so I'm shocked that, this is such a slam dunk case that I'm in disbelief. But I come to you to ask for your support because the judge has set a final hearing for October 22nd, 2018, which is down the street. And we want to make sure that we're going to send a message as Emilio's attorney and as a message from the press, which is you all, that we're watching the judge and that we're not going to let him get away with minimizing, dehumanizing, and denying this asylum claim that should be granted. And I use all those Ds because that's what the government does. They like to deny, discredit, dehumanize, and deport. They're nothing but a deportation machine. This is not justice. I was telling Margot that most cases like Emilio's are won around the country, or even other parts of Texas. This is not a case that should have been litigated and appealed and habeas. We shouldn't have to do all those resources. This is a straightforward case. This is a guy who's a truth teller, exposed government corruption. He gets credible death threats. He comes, does nothing wrong, enters the country legally, and what do? We put him in a jumpsuit. We treat him like a criminal. We discredit him. We say he's a liar. We say he's a fraudster. He's a trickster. He's none of that. He's a journalist. And just because the judge didn't understand that in Mexico there's self-censorship, I mean, that's sad that we had to educate the judge and say, Your Honor. But I get it, because even me as a normal person, when I first represented a Mexican journalist, and I said, I need all the articles that you wrote about corruption in Mexico with your name. And he tells me my name, I don't put my byline. And I'm like, well, what do you mean? Did you write the articles or did you not? So of course I wrote them, but I don't put my name on them. And I was like, well, why not? That doesn't make sense to me. It doesn't make if I write something, I'm going to sign off on it. He said, not in Mexico. In Mexico, you get killed. If I expose a government official at the local, state, or national level, and they know that I wrote it, I could die just like that. So he explained it to me. Then like, oh my God, now I understand. And so I get it. So, we educated the judge. Maybe at the time he didn't get it, but now there's no excuses. There's no excuses. Emilio needs to be granted asylum. We ask for your help to descend to El Paso, expose the judge, if need be. I hope we don't have to do that, but if we do, then I ask for your continued support to be there on October 22nd to observe and report and shine light. But I hope also that the judge comes to his senses and says, you know what, Mr. Beckett's right. This is a winnable case. I'm going to grant this asylum, and I'm going to make sure that Emilio Gutiérrez-Soto and Oscar are allowed to stay in the United States. And I hope he does the right thing, but if he doesn't, then we're back to square one. Appeal. I doubt that Emilio would be taken into custody. I'm almost like a 99.9%, but of course I'm not the government. The government could decide to arrest him at the court. I've never seen that happen before, though, ever. Emilio has no criminal history, has done nothing wrong. He's doing his fellowship. So more than likely on October 22nd, 2018, if the Board of Immigration Appeals does not rule in my favor to change the venue to Michigan, then we will proceed with the asylum case on October 22nd, and then the judge will either grant or deny it. But I think more than likely he will not issue a decision that day, and he's going to reduce it to a writing, and then we're going to get it in the mail. And if it's negative, then we're going to have to appeal. And the good thing about that is there's the automatic stay provision that when you appeal the first decision from the immigration judge, the law says they can't deport Emilio. He's protected. But if you lose that appeal, then they can deport him, and you can do what we call a circuit court stay, a removal, and an appeal to the Fifth Circuit. And it has to be the Fifth Circuit because the case is in Texas. If it was in Michigan, then it would be a different circuit. And so we think that Emilio is doing great in Michigan. He loves it. I see a changed person. I see the journalist that he was and that he is. And I say he was because when he was in detention, he almost gave up. He told me one time, he was crying. He said, I've done nothing wrong. All I did was my job. And look where I'm at now. I'm in a jumpsuit. Mentally, I'm broken. He said, do you know how hard it is as a father to look at my son Oscar in the eyes and that I put him in this situation just for writing a story? And I said, no, it's not your fault. I said, you shouldn't have any self-guilt. You did your job. That's your job as a journalist. You did your job, and you shouldn't be persecuted for that. It's the government. It's the Mexican government who's doing this to you. It's our government who put you in prison. It's not your fault. He said, yeah, but when you see your own son in a jumpsuit because of what I wrote, I don't know if it's worth it anymore. And I said, of course it is, because in your heart, you're a journalist. And when you wrote those stories, you loved it. You were doing your job. And I said, don't ever forget that. And now I see the fire in him again. He wants to be what he once was, a great journalist. And I say once because in his mind he had given up, right? He said, that no longer do I want this profession because of the suffering. But now that he's at the university, he's with fellows, it's a different story. He's writing again. He's happy. I mean, he the way he dresses, the way he talks, he's got it all. And so I guess my whole point was our government diminished, dehumanized Emilio, and made him believe that he's not a journalist. And that's the point. That's why I'm here today, because I want your support. I want to show the judge this man is a journalist, always was, always is. And he's been a journalist, and you should be granting him asylum. I shouldn't even be here. We shouldn't even be talking about it. This is like a straightforward case. But sadly, I have to come before you and seek your assistance to make sure that Emilio is not taken into custody and to make sure that the judge makes the right decision. And unfortunately, in these times of ours, um, you know, this is what it takes. A whole community, a community of lawyers, a community of journalists, a community of activists and professionals like yourselves to make sure that the truth is being told and that the judge does the correct thing. Because unfortunately, we have an administration right now that basically they're making up the law as they go. And basically, justice is not being, they're not being impartial. It seems to me that the judges now are being controlled, and the DHS has a lot of influence. And as you can see in this little motion, right, it's just in a very short little motion, but the DHS is almost telling the judge what to do. They're basically saying, Judge, you shouldn't look at this evidence. You should probably deny this case. Don't do the change of venue. So to me is where's the they're not impartial anymore. So anyhow, my time is limited, but I did want to show you this great picture of Emilio. Here he is with Oscar and with Lynette from the University of Michigan. Great prestigious fellowship. And I sent some other pictures, but I guess they're being passed around. Okay, yeah, and then here's another one. So also, part of the, when we did the appeal, there was a bunch of articles that we could not find that Emilio wrote in Mexico, hundreds of them, that he wrote for the Diario de Juárez, the Diario of Casas Grandes, Ascensión, Chihuahua, just all these articles, but we couldn't find them because it's not easy. And that's one thing that I told the judge. I said, Judge, we take it for granted here in the United States. If I go to the newspaper El Paso Times and they say, hey, would you guys give me a certification that you guys wrote this article, back in 2009? Oh yeah, let me check the archives and get you a certified letter or something that we can say that we wrote that article, that we published it. Doesn't mean that they agree with the contents, but we published it. Well, I try to do that with El Diario de Juárez, and you should have seen the runaround that I got. I go to the owner and I say, hey, I got this case, and I want to prove that my client, Emilio Gutiérrez-Soto, wrote all these articles in Mexico, but I can't find them. It's not like it's easy, and I don't go to Mexico. I can't go over there. I said, it's dangerous, and I'm not going to go over there asking questions. So I asked the owner that was in El Paso if he would help me. And then he says, oh, I hear you. And I said, it's very simple, sir. I just want to know these articles here, if you wrote them, and you give me a certification. And then he says, oh, yeah, I could help you with that. But let me put some thought. I'll call you. So, okay. So he calls me. And then he says, you bring me a federal court order, and I'll do it. Absent a federal court order, I'm not giving you nothing. And I'm shocked. I'm like, what? It's like, I'm not asking you for, it's very simple. Like, he said, yeah, but I know what you're asking for, but I'm not going to do it for you. And I was shocked. And so then I called all these newspapers in Mexico, and I asked them the same thing. They gave me the runaround. So then I'm like, oh my God, man, this is crazy. I'm not asking for something, outrageous. To me, this is a very simple thing that I'm asking for. So it taught me a lesson. It says, is that the judges, they sometimes judge cases on an American standard, but in Mexico, they operate different. And I don't mean that it's put down. It's just different. Over there, when you're asking for certifications, they get scared. They think you're going to sue them, or I don't know what he was thinking, but he didn't want to cooperate. And when I called all the newspapers in Mexico, none of them wanted to cooperate with us. And then we would say, Emilio Gutiérrez would like, oh no, I don't want to talk to you. So it's like I wasn't getting anywhere. So anyways, to make a long story short, we finally, Molly Molloy from the University of New Mexico was able to look in some archives through a paid subscription, obscure website from Chihuahua, and she was able to download over 100 articles, and they were submitted to the Board of Immigration Appeals, but in Spanish, because we didn't have time to translate them, because that's some heavy-duty translations. But we finally, in this picture here, it depicts students at the University of Michigan who had I guess a translation marathon. and they were able to translate over 200 pages of materials for Emilio Gutiérrez-Soto, of all the articles he wrote that we were able to generate from 2003 to 2010. And we submitted them to the court. And our great government, ICE attorneys, are saying that the judge shouldn't even consider them. And to me, it's almost laughable because they're already part of the record. We submitted them to the BIA, so they're already part of the records. How can you exclude something that's already part of the record? The difference is that we took the time to translate them so the judge can read them, because we know that he can just simply say, hey, the rules require that they be translated. And the board accepted them because we gave an explanation. We said, hey, by the way, here's all these articles. We're sorry, but to translate these hundreds of pages is not an easy task. In fact, when I reached out to expert translators and I asked them what would it cost, they gave me numbers like $5,000 to $6,000 because it's like $25 a page. If you want, through one of those businesses, that's what they charge. So it would have been like over $5,000 to $6,000. And the University of Michigan graduate students and decided to do a marathon, and I think they did it within like a week or something. So it's really interesting that I was able, because I speak Spanish, but I won't lie, my reading Spanish is not that great. And so I was able to read all the articles, and it was very interesting that Emilio wrote about a little bit about everything, from the environment to a lot of criminal stuff that was happening, shootouts, people getting arrested. There's one little story about a reporter that was found dead. So, I mean, Emilio really was, a local reporter, and he was really like reporting on everything. And I think he rubbed a lot of people the wrong way. And he was just simply doing his job. But we'll be happy to share those articles. And then this is Emilio with the University of Michigan president, having some wine and just hanging out. So to me, it's great to see Emilio going from a jumpsuit behind a metal wall, high fences, extra security. I believe he was even wearing an ankle bracelet inside the detention center, which makes no sense to me. You're already inside a detention center, high security, armed guards, and you have a monitoring device on you. That's just exaggerated. It's supposed to be a civil detention, right? And so he was, but here he is with the University of Michigan president. And then, did I talk about this one already?
That's the next one. Maybe when that comes on the phone, you can put that up. So
Okay.
No issue.
And so as you can see, I mean, look at Emilio, man. He looks happy. Yeah. When I would go see him at the detention center, I mean, it was really hard for me, because I was the one that had mostly contact with him, and like he would cry. He would cry, and he would tell me, "Get me out of here. I can't take it anymore. This is torture. My son's suffering." And to see him go from wearing a jumpsuit to this, it's amazing. And
Picture of Emilio and Oscar together. That was a really great picture. It's somewhere.
It's not up here.
Okay, I'll find it.
I think it's in that suitcase, maybe.
No, we passed it out.
Oh, here it is.
Okay.
I got
So
it.
that's them together.
So look at, and Oscar works at Zingerman's? Zingerman's.
One of the world-class delicatessens. Just an amazing delicatessen in Ann Arbor, and they have business classes in this store.
I'll pass it over to Bill. So Zingerman's is a multi-million-dollar business that sells delis, and the owner and CEO actually took Oscar under his wing and is giving him training. He's working for him, and wrote him a real nice letter. Wrote a letter to the judge, in fact, saying Oscar's wonderful young man. He's training. He's working here. He talks about his business. He talks about how he started as a small mom and pop shop to a multi-million-dollar business. And so, to me, I mean, this is great. And this is, I thank all you guys, because none of this, I couldn't have done this by myself. This was a community effort. Margot, everybody, Bill, everybody here has helped. And to see I imagine for you guys to see a fellow journalist, he was basically rock bottom to this, and now our next step is to make sure he gets asylum, and that's why I'm here today. Just if you happen to be in El Paso, Texas, on the 22nd, you have some time, we welcome you to the court. We're gonna make sure we tell the judge you're gonna have a live audience, and you got people from all over the United States are gonna come and observe you. So hopefully, the judge will feel that he's got to do the right thing, or he might not care, because some judges really don't give a frank anymore. They basically say, I don't care who's here, I don't care if he's from the press, I'm gonna do what I'm gonna do. Okay, fine, that's fair enough. But we're watching you, and we're gonna do our presentation. We're gonna make sure that you do the right thing. If you don't want to do the right thing, that's we appeal them. We also invited Beto O'Rourke's office. Mr. Rodarte is here with us today. He's a chief of staff for Beto O'Rourke. Thank you for being here. I had a meeting with him yesterday, and I'm going to give him some due credit too. Beto O'Rourke actually went to visit Emilio in person. Beto O'Rourke, who's running Texas Senate against Ted Cruz. I hope he wins. He really tried to get Emilio out. So like I said, it was a community effort. We had, our congressman pleading with ICE. Bill McCarran was the first one to go down there right before Christmas, met with ICE officials, high-ranking officials, and nicely told them, it's Christmas, let him go home for Christmas. And they said no to Bill. And not only did they say no to Bill, but they said, tone it down. That's what they told Bill. And that's how I met Bill, and Bill was very upset, and exchanged words with the director, very firm, and I thought, wow, Bill came all the way from Washington D.C., was very polite, explained to the director of ICE why Emilio should be released, and he looked at him in the eyes and said, heck no, I don't care, I'm not releasing him. And then, by the way, the director didn't say it, but the attorney that was there for ICE said, you guys need to tone it down. And so, Bill was very, very upset. And the room got very quiet, when Bill said, I'm going to make sure that everybody in the world knows your names. I'm going to make sure that everybody knows what you're doing here in El Paso. And we were like, wow, man, that's powerful. And Bill didn't hold back. And I was like, wow, that's some very good advocacy. And Bill is true to his word. The whole world knows about Emilio Gutiérrez-Soto. So thank you, Bill. And do you have any questions for me? Because I don't think I have anything else to add. Before
we get into the Q&A,
sure.
let me make a couple.
Sure. No problem. Yeah, you have any questions on the procedure, where the case is at, anything? No one? Any specific questions? No? Okay.
We will.
Oh, at the end. Okay.
Yeah.
Is there anything that I missed or anything that where the case is at, Margo, anything? No?
This was phenomenal, and I really appreciate... fun. Yeah. So this was really great. I hope that all of you here see and understand, what fantastic representation Emilio has. And we so appreciate your pro bono work here. I love the image that you drew for us of Emilio in his orange jumpsuit in the detention center, going from that to a suit and tie, sharing a conversation and having a glass of wine with the president of one of the most prestigious universities in America, the University of Michigan. I am from Michigan, and it's a big school.
It's absolutely.
Yeah.
Even the federal judge was impressed. When we went before the federal judge, he said, your client is so sympathetic in that fellowship that he got, and he was impressed. And he looked at the government and it's like, what are you guys doing? Like, why are you guys going after this guy? So Emilio has impacted many people, And like I said, it's been a community effort, and I want to thank all of you, because I don't think none of this would have happened without all this support. So I'm not going to take this credit. The credit is a combined credit. Thank you.
It's absolutely a combined credit. I love the credit also that he gave to our executive director, Bill McCarran, who has been a real engine, a real driver in this case. He has really been the momentum behind so many of the things that have happened and that have worked here in getting Emilio freed from detention and hopefully securing asylum for him here in the United States of America. So as Eduardo mentioned, something that you all here in the room can do, and those of you watching online, you can be there for Emilio. You can tweet about his case. You can speak about it. You can encourage your colleagues in the newsrooms to write about it. You can let the whole world know so that justice will be given to this journalist, and injustice and arbitrary detention will be a thing of the past. I'm going to take the podium mic. So Emilio's life and Oscar's life are in the hands of Judge Howe in El Paso. Now, Judge Howe somehow doesn't seem to see that. So our job, I think, as journalists, is to help the judge and the world see that. We believe that once he understands that deportation means death, he will grant Emilio and Oscar asylum. That will be a great day for America. We will have added 2 tremendous citizens who know the value of freedom and what our country stands for. I'd like to call on John Donnelly, who is the chair of the National Press Club's Press Freedom Committee. John knows this story very well, and he's going to guide us through the Q&A.
Thank you, Andrea. And great job, Eduardo, walking us through where we stand. Just a couple quick comments. I'm happy to be here today, but more, I'm sad to be here today. It is absolutely ridiculous that this continues to drag on like this, okay? Slam dunk is exactly what this is. Immigration's a hot button topic in this country right now. And of course, we shouldn't let just anybody come into the country. But this is ridiculous, this case, that this has gone on like this. Let me make a couple points. First of all, one of the contentions that the judge had in the original denial was that he was not really in danger in Mexico, or at least that was in question. But why would somebody put yourself at risk, you and your son, at risk of detention and legal limbo and everything that he's gone through? Why would somebody do that if they weren't at risk, okay? Absent all the other evidence that's been compiled, okay? And the other question seemed to be a question of whether he was in fact a journalist. And let me put it this way. Remember where we are. This is the National Press Club. Why would the National Press Club, Reporters Without Borders, Committee to Protect Journalists, University of Michigan, why would all of these august institutions be standing behind Emilio if he wasn't a reporter and if his life really wasn't in danger, okay? So all we're asking really is for the judge to look at the evidence, and it's extremely disconcerting to hear this anecdote from Eduardo about the judge saying, I haven't read it and I don't think you're going to change my mind. Well, if you haven't read it, how do you know if we're going to change your mind? And that's all we're asking, right, is for him to take a look at the evidence. And it is also disconcerting that DHS would say to the judge, don't look at all the evidence in this case. And it does seem to be kind of heavy-handed there for DHS to be saying, we're watching you, in effect, to the judge. So we're here to say, we're watching too. And we represent the news organizations in this country and frankly, concerned citizens also. And so, it's time for us to really keep pounding the podium about this. I love to see the pictures of Emilio with the president of the University of Michigan, but let's not be under any kind of illusions that he's out of danger, because he's not, and that's why we're here. So with that, I want to open it up to questions from those of you here in the room and anyone who's online. And I would ask that before you pose your question, that you wait for the microphone. And the question could be for any of us.
Do you want to take the mic and bring Eduardo back to the podium?
Okay, sure. Let me do that. Eduardo, why don't you come back up? So you'll probably be answering the bulk of the questions. Come on back up.
I was just going to wait because maybe. Is there any specific questions that anyone has?
Any questions? Okay.
Actually, I have a couple of questions that came up for me during your comments today, Eduardo. So one, I wanted to ask you, what does it mean that on, I think you said October 10th, you were unable to update the judge? So if I understand correctly, he ordered you he ordered you to come back to his courtroom on October 10th and update him.
Correct.
You did that. You came to the courtroom and you showed up, and then he refused to give you an audience. So what information is he missing because he didn't want to hear from you? What should have happened there but didn't?
So we Emilio, right before he left to Michigan, we had a status conference with the judge. Emilio showed up, and the judge asked me, how do you want to move forward? And I said, well, Your Honor, I don't think we should move forward. This case should be in Michigan. Here's my change of venue. He denies it. He says, no, I'm going to set this up for trial right away. And I said, why right away, Judge? He said, because. He goes, I'm not going to let this drag on anymore. It's going to be quick. But to me, quick means he's not going to give justice. Quick means he's not going to read everything. He wants to just be done with it. So I said, no, wait a minute, Judge. You need to slow down. Why are you rushing this case? My client's in Michigan. He shouldn't have to be coming back right away. He's just going to start his fellowship. And he's like, well, he can go to Michigan, but I want him back here on the 22nd. And then he ordered me to answer her question. He said, on October 10th, we're going to have another status conference, but only you're going to come by yourself. And then we're going to talk about how we're going to proceed. So I said, oh, okay. So my thoughts was, I'm going to show up on October 10th, and I'm just going to be straight with the judge and say, Judge, I appealed your denial of my change of venue. Don't go forward on this case until the board makes a decision. That's the right thing to do. So I call the court, and I go in person, and they tell me, no, there's no status conference. And I'm like, I'm 100% sure that I'm not insane, and the judge told me that, and I noted it, and my client was in the courtroom, and we all heard it. He said to come back on the 10th. Well, nothing happened on the 10th, so I was not able to see the judge. I was not able to tell him that. So there was no status conference. So now it's just straight October 22nd, a final hearing, and I believe he gave us like 4 hours to do the case. And then we got one expert witness, which is Lynette that she's going to talk about the University of Michigan Fellowship Program, why she picked Emilio, which I think is very relevant because, that shows his credentials, that he's not just, not some guy that wrote a little report that thinks no, this is a bona fide journalist. And what the government's doing is saying, who cares what Lynette Clementson has to say? She's not even relevant to the case. And that's the paper that I gave you guys today. So to me, I'm shocked. I'm like, what's wrong with, I think it's very relevant. But anyhow, nothing happened on October 10th. And now we just go for a final hearing. And whether it goes or not, well, I don't know for sure because there still might be a chance that on October 22nd, I can tell the judge, if the board has not ruled on my change of venue, I don't think it's correct. I don't think it's due process for you to go forward because I already accused you of being biased. And by me accusing you of being biased, there could be reprisals against me. There's going to be reprisals against Emilio. And I'll be frank with you. When Emilio goes in front of that judge, I see a change in his personality. I see a change in him, like he gets nervous, he's shaking, PTSD comes back 100%. And so it's very dangerous. I feel bad for Emilio. I don't want him to be in front of that. I don't think he's going to get a fair shake because that's all we want. Can you give us a fair shake? I'm not going to get a fair shake. So why should I be in front of him? And so that's what's happening.
Do you think that there is a real chance that Judge Howe will not read the supplementary documents that prove that Emilio, of course, is a journalist, as we know he is, or look at the emails, the government emails, or any of the other documents or evidence that you're bringing to him that BIA ordered him to review? Is there a chance that he may not look at those?
I feel like, in the old decision, I don't really think that the judge understood the case. I don't think he understood what self-censorship is. I don't think he understood that Emilio was a bona fide journalist. So there's always that chance that he might not. Of course, he has a clerk that's working on this case specifically, because he told me, he goes, I have my clerk working on this case, and we have a vested interest. We put a lot of time into it. So I'm hoping that this time around he will consider it. But then we have DHS telling the judge, you can only consider what was filed in the appeal, but all this new evidence that I just recently, like these photos, I filed them. I want the judge to see Emilio. I want the judge to know that he's doing good in Michigan. I want him to know what the Committee to Protect Journalists in Mexico City are saying. And they basically told me there is the federal mechanism to protect journalists, which I think in Spanish is called FEADLE. I can't tell you what it stands for right now, but I just know it's a federal mechanism through the U.S. Attorney General's office in Mexico, who gives armed guards, panic buttons to journalists. And so CPJ are the experts because they deal with that program. And they wrote a letter, an affidavit to the judge saying, there is no mechanism. The mechanism, yes, it exists, has no resources, and journalists have been killed on it. There's no way that this mechanism is going to protect Emilio. And I think that makes the case so strong and winnable, and that's why you see that little motion that the government wrote is trying to exclude it, which I think is very relevant. And it's an update, but I don't think it's not something crazy. It's something that should be admitted. You had a question.
Your last remarks may have answered my question. My name is Tom Melia. I'm the Washington director of PEN America. But I spent 5 years recently in the State Department in the Obama administration working on democracy and human rights issues. So my question is it in question in this proceeding that it's dangerous to be a journalist in Mexico?
Yes.
We've talked mostly about, is he a journalist or is he not a journalist? Is the judge persuaded that if he's a journalist, it's dangerous to be a journalist in Mexico?
I think the last time around, he actually, what happened, when he lost his case, is that I think the Commission for Human Rights out of Mexico City read about Emilio's story in 2011, and Emilio had filed complaints against military officers in 2008, 2005, but they did nothing. There was really no action by the commission. But in 2011, they read an article in Mexico City, and they tracked down Emilio all the way to El Paso, Texas. They tracked down his attorney, and then they said, Emilio, your rights have been violated. And sorry that we didn't do anything before, but we just read about you, and we think we now want to help you. In fact, we invite you to come back to Mexico, and you can be a journalist all over again, and we're going to protect you. So the judge got wind of that and said, oh, Emilio, what did you do? Did you go back? Heck no, I'm not going back. I don't trust the commission. I filed my complaints in 2005, 2008. These guys didn't do anything to 2011, and only because they read about it. And so the judge was like, well, you turned down protection from the Mexican government, and he used that against him. But we all know, because I've done other cases, there's also a witness protection program, and then you have the new journalist protection mechanism, but they work out of the same office. And I can tell you, and I remember, I believe a 2009 very, very good article from Time magazine that said, witness protection in Mexico, what protection? There is no protection. So the judge had all that information, and he is questioning that. The judge thinks that Emilio could go to another part of Mexico and go back to this mechanism, that he's going to be okay. So that is in question, and that's why we had CPJ address that. Now we hope that the judge considers it. And even the State Department wrote a very strong letter. Mr. Busby, Deputy Director, State Department, wrote a very, very good letter through Margot. And
Scott has the job I used to have.
oh, okay. And so he wrote a very powerful letter that the judge is not going to be able to ignore because the Board of Immigration Appeals actually considered that letter when they sent the case back. But it doesn't, I mean, the letter's great, but the CPJ affidavit goes more into detail exactly how the mechanism works. I've learned even it talks about who the players are, how it operates, but then it also says a lot of corruption, a lot of impunity. It's a program that can't be trusted.
To follow up, hi, I'm Margot Ewan, the U.S. Director for Reporters Without Borders. The mechanism you're talking about actually was just announced by the incoming president in Mexico to have decreased funding to it, which is laughable given that I think already 7 journalists have been murdered in Mexico so far in 2018, according to our tally. We've also engaged on advocacy in support of Emilio's case and other cases of journalists murdered in Mexico, by engaging with the Senate Appropriations Committee about how they can maybe restrict funding to, unless there's any real show of investigation on the ground. But I think it's important to note that there's new evidence every day that shows that Mexico is more and more dangerous. And it's really worrying that the judges refuse to see that. So that was more of a comment than a question. Sorry.
No, and you know, you're absolutely right. And like I said, like in the beginning, right? I said I'm in a way I feel awkward being here because, you know, like you said, you know, Margot and the gentleman, you have a lot of experience and just, you know, from your experience, you know that the country conditions are so dire for journalists. Journalists are being executed. There's impunity. There's corruption. There's no protection. So I imagine that you're probably thinking, what the heck is going down there in Texas? This is a case that should have been granted. Well, I'm with you, and that's why I'm here. That's the kind of stuff we have to put up with at the border because the judge is also being pressured by the Attorney General and by the DHS, ICE. He's a former ICE attorney. So his asylum grants are like less than 2%. And to get stats on Judge Howe through the Syracuse University, they've been trying to get stats on him and they can't because I guess the amount of cases has to reach a certain amount before they can do stats on him. And so I know that it's probably shocking to you guys out here in DC, but in Texas, that's the norm. I did hear recently that another journalist won asylum in Texas, which I'm very, very happy for. And to be truthful, Emilio should have won his case just like that. But unfortunately, on the border, I would tell you that the judges, I go back to my Ds, dehumanize, diminish, deny, deport. They are deportation machines. And sometimes, no matter what you put in front of them, it's not good enough. And that's the sad part, that as an immigration judge, they have the power and to be creative and say, I'm going to make sure this guy wins, but at the same time, they can take that creativity and say, I'm going to make sure that this guy loses. And the way he went around Emilio's case was, I don't even think you wrote those articles because your name's not on it, which is in contradiction of the State Department, because at the time, I believe the State Department has said, we recognize that in Mexico, journalists are practicing self-censorship. It's right there. Professor Molly Malloy from the University of New Mexico went and testified and told the judge, and the judge ignored her. And in fact, the judge said, I don't even think she's even an expert. And you know what he told me last time, too? He said, hey, Mr. Beckett, by the way, don't try to bring me these so-called experts anymore because I don't need to hear from them. And I'm like, what? So I'm like, so are you like a know-all judge? You're an expert? And we're not. I'm an attorney, but I'm not an expert. That's why I reached out to CPJ. They're the expert. I know about the program, but I don't work at Mexico City. I don't work with journalists. So that's an expert. But the judge said, don't bring me your so-called experts anymore. I don't need to hear from them. And that's when I said, no, this has gone too far. this is a judge that shouldn't hear this case. He doesn't deserve to hear the case. I'm sorry about that. I know I went on.
Just a quick comment on the climate in Mexico, follow up on this question from Penn. So Vicente Fox, former president of Mexico, when he's here on camera, is asked, should Emilio get asylum? He knew about the case. His quick answer was yes. He knows what's going on in Mexico. He's proud of Mexico. You know, he's critical of it, but proud. He knows that returning Emilio to Mexico is a risky and dangerous situation. So, I mean, it's not just our State Department, you know, which Margot helped develop that. It's not just CPJ. It's you know, former leaders of the country, you know, who are in a position are ready and in a position to know what's going on, say he should get asylum for his protection.
And the judge is saying so-called experts. But there is a federal regulation that Mr. Busby actually talked about, and it's in the regulations, and it says that an immigration judge must take administrative notice of things that are happening. And there's another decision that says judges cannot be ignorant of country conditions. And in fact, recently in El Paso, there was a Syrian asylum seeker. I hate to bring him up, but he had lost. And if you ask any lawyer, says, oh my God, a Syrian refugee, that's a prototypical asylum. I mean, that's like genocide, bombs. The guy lost. And he appealed it, and the board came back and said, what the heck is this judge doing? And he cited the regulation and said, you can't pretend to be ignorant of what's going on in Syria. There's bombings, there's genocide, there's killings. And they said, you know what? We're not even going to send this case back. This is such a bad decision. We're going to grant the asylum. And they granted it. I tried to do that for Emilio. I told the board, I said, hey, because I knew about that case, and I said, you have the power to grant him, but if you don't want to, then send it back. And I also said, but you can send it back to a different judge. But they sent it back to the same judge, unfortunately. So we're stuck for now.
We have a question in the back.
Yes. Hi, bonjour. My name is Sylvie Bello, and I'm with the Cameroon American Council. And at the Cameroon American Council, we also have an African Media Initiative. And we're, a couple of years ago, worked on the Patrice Ngana, who was also, he's an author and a professor and was also arrested. My interest here today is to find out, you know, it definitely seems like the community involvement has been mostly around with mainstream organizations. How can other immigrant groups, other immigrant media, you know, who are very much vested in immigration, can also be part of this on October 22nd? Do you have materials in other languages, maybe Spanish, but what about like maybe French? We would very much, you know, like to see a great end result to this and asylum granted as Africans who are also very stuck in the immigration process. Thank you.
Sure. Does anyone want to answer? To be honest, I don't have any materials in French or any other language. We welcome anyone that wants to support Emilio, and I hand it over to Margot. She has.
Yeah, I mean, we don't have the court filings in French, but RSF is a French, Reporters Without Borders is a French-based organization, so everything we publish is translated into French. So if you go to our website, you can read about Emilio's case in French and share it with your followers. Yeah.
There you go. And she has the entire, access to everything.
Quite a lot on his case. I think 10 years ago when Emilio first came into the U.S., the person who opened our U.S. office actually vouched for him, testified for him. So it's been a case we've been dedicated to since the beginning. And so you can go back into history and look at that, even in French then too.
And we would welcome your organization and your affiliated organizations to show up for Emilio in El Paso on October 22nd.
Yeah, and you could have my, if you need the court's address, I welcome anyone and everyone, because this is a community effort. It's a community fight. We're fighting for a journalist, but we're also fighting for justice for everybody. And if Emilio's case can help find justice to other persons in a similar situated, then so be it. And so I have no objections. Welcome you.
Good morning. My name is Dagmar Thiel. I'm with Fundamedios USA, a new organization in the US that is advocating for press freedom, mainly for Hispanic journalists and Hispanic media. And we've been working with Reporters Without Borders on the Serafin Moran case, the Cuban journalist that has yesterday just he will be released today from jail in Texas. And I don't know if this can help as a precedent, because it's also Texas, it was partial, it was, and well, actually he is a Cuban journalist, and the situation in Cuba is worse than in Mexico, but it could be a precedent for the judge. Do you need us to help you with the documentation from Ballard's part, who were the attorneys working on that?
And I believe I'm familiar with that case, because I remember I received a phone call and made some referrals, and I'm glad to hear that he won. And I actually, when I talked to someone on the phone, I said, "This is a good case. This person should win." And I remember at the time they were trying to get him out, and I said, "Well, if you can't get him out, you could win the case." And then he gets out. So I'm very happy to hear that. Definitely, we could use it. Asylum law, let me tell you real quick about asylum law. It's like a case-by-case basis. So even if you have a decision that's very similar, the judge is very case-specific to the specific facts. We have given the judge copies of all other journalists that we know of in Texas and San Antonio. In fact, even the judge himself had awarded asylum to one of Emilio's colleagues, but the judge ignored those decisions. But definitely, if you want to send it to me, I would like to read the decision, and then it's not going to hurt.
So thank you so much for that comment. We have on the phone, we have Lynette Clementson, who's a director with the Knight Wallace program at the University of Michigan, which has granted Emilio one of its prestigious journalism fellowships. And I wanted to ask Lynette, is there something that you would like to contribute to the conversation today? If we can hear you, and if you can hear us, we would love to hear from you.
Thank you so much, and let me know if you need me to speak louder. Thank you, Ed, for being there in Washington today, and to all of our colleagues at the National Press Club who have worked so hard to keep attention on this case. I just want to second everything that Ed said about how Emilio is doing here at the University of Michigan and why we accepted him as a Knight Wallace Fellow. We had been involved in this case and advocating on press freedom grounds, but the Knight Wallace Fellowship accepts 18 to 20 journalists every year to come to the University of Michigan to pursue study related to their work. And because Emilio's credentials as a journalist were fundamentally in question in this case, and because his work as a journalist for well over 20 years is irrefutable, we felt that it was important to be strongly involved. And I went last April to meet Emilio and Oscar at the detention center, did an interview with Emilio like I do for all journalists who are finalists for a fellowship. And I think it's important to note that the fellows we take, it is not simply about accomplishments in a journalist's past, but about their desire to continue in their field. And from talking with Emilio, it was very clear to me that that he wanted nothing more than to continue in his profession, and that he felt he had more to learn and to do, and was eager to return to writing, and if only given a chance. And so we were happy to step up and provide the fellowship, and he's involved in a very rigorous program at the University of Michigan. All of the activities of the fellowship, he's taking classes. One class that he's taking is a course in the law school, Law 660, The Boundaries of Citizenship, Inclusion, Exclusion, and the History of Civil Rights Under the Law. these are the kinds of things our fellows pursue, and Emilio has not only a lot to learn in that class, but also a lot to offer. And then to the journalists in the room, I think one thing that has not come up yet that an organization like ours feels is important is that we've been focusing in this conversation thus far on showing up for Emilio to support him, to offer professional support. But there is also still reporting to do on this story. One of the primary drivers around the release of Emilio and Oscar on July 26th was a FOIA request and a ruling that that the government had to turn over a series of emails that would have suggested that Emilio was specifically targeted for arrest for speaking out against the administration's policies on asylum and immigration. And once it was ordered that those emails be turned over, they were miraculously released. But I think we still haven't seen all of those emails. And so while we very much want and need the support of journalists writing about Emilio's past, there is still reporting to do about how this recent arrest and detention happened. What happened between October 17th, when Emilio was awarded the National Press Club Award and he spoke out against the administration, and December 2017, when he was detained and held for nearly 8 months. So I just would make an appeal for reporters to keep reporting on this story fully, and we think that there's still valuable information that would help specifically in this case, but would also shine a light on practices that may be affecting other people. And I'm happy to answer any other questions about the fellowship or how Emilio is doing in Michigan.
Could you, Lynette, give us a few details on his day-to-day? What does his life look like now that he's in Ann Arbor with Oscar?
Sure. So the fellowship is it's very busy. Our fellows take classes. Emilio is taking English language classes. He's taking the course in the law school. We also really recommend that all of our fellows take at least one class that has absolutely nothing to do with their academic pursuit at the university, just something for personal growth and development. And Emilio is taking an Afro-Cuban drumming class with another of our fellows from Israel. And I encourage this class strongly, and we think it is fabulous because the class is an amazing stress relief and just good for the soul. And the professor in that class is wonderful and welcomes him fully. And then twice a week, every Tuesday and Thursday afternoon, we have seminars at Wallace House, the home base of the fellowship. And we bring in speakers and we have events. And so sometimes the speakers are from the university. Sometimes they are journalists coming to talk about what's happening in the field. And so that's a very busy aspect of the fellowship. This past Tuesday, we had a public event on zero tolerance policy and our current situation with immigration policy. And Maria Elena Salinas came to moderate a discussion, and we offered Emilio a chance to be on the panel. He wanted to just consume the conversation and not be in the spotlight. And so the panel was made up of Ginger Thompson from ProPublica, Aaron Nelson of the San Antonio Express News, who covers border issues. He is also a fellow and a colleague of Emilio's at Michigan this year, and Ann Lynn, an immigration expert from our Ford School for Public Policy, and moderated by Maria Elena Salinas. And so we have events like that. Last night we had a fellow return from France, and he came to talk about a project that he started during the fellowship called Forbidden Stories, that is a project focused on reporting, continuing the reporting of journalists who have been jailed, threatened, or killed. And this organization may be one that you've heard of because this past year they produced something called the Daphne Project to finish the work of Daphne Galizia, who was killed in Malta in a car bomb a year ago. And so Emilio is having a chance to interact with other journalists who are doing work that is related to both to his case and to his intellectual pursuits. So it's a very full experience, and the class of fellows is just, it is just an incredibly warm and collegial environment. We have fellows in this class from the New York Times, from Politico, from Bloomberg. We have from many different countries, from Israel, from Afghanistan, from Uganda. And last night we took our class picture, and so all of the fellows came dressed up, and we had it was a very good time. And Emilio also I think has rekindled his love of playing the guitar and singing. So it's a very healing experience. He was in detention for almost 8 months, and our fellowship, the academic year, is 8 months. And so my great hope is that we are allowed to return to Michigan from this hearing on October 22nd, and that we can use the 8 months in Ann Arbor to try to undo the personal, human, intellectual, physical damage that was done during the 8 months that he was in detention in El Paso.
Hey, Lynette, thank you for that. This is Bill McCarran.
Hi, Bill.
Hey.
Thank you.
Well, it's wonderful that you have created this environment for Emilio and for all the other journalists that are there. And your description of its fullness is good for everyone to hear. I understand that these fellows are not, part of the deal is they're not supposed to be working, when they're there.
That is correct.
But can you share with the group, right before Emilio began with you, before he was under the cannot work restriction, he did do some journalism for Columbia Journalism Review. I think we have a copy of the article here. And just for the recording and everything, and because of your expertise, can you explain to people what Columbia Journalism Review is and how fantastic this is that he could write this article and be compensated like any other contributor to CJR?
Thanks for raising that, Bill. It actually was quite significant. Because most of the journalists who come to the program are coming straight from very hectic jobs in a newsroom, and part of the goal of the fellowship is to give people a chance to step back from their work and learn new things so that they can go on and be more ambitious in their careers. One of the rules of the fellowship is that you agree to stop working professionally during the academic year. But most of our fellows are working right up into the last minute. And so Emilio arrived in Ann Arbor in mid-August, and so had a couple of weeks before the fellowship started. And it was quite significant that he was eager to return to writing, and that the Columbia Journalism Review, one of the most prestigious publications for the journalism world that keeps track of developments, editorial and business developments in journalism, and features the work and movements of writers, that they would publish Emilio's work. And so after many years of other people writing about Emilio, the story, he got his first chance to write his own first account of what had happened to him during his months in detention. And I think that was a very empowering experience for him, to relate his experience in his own words and to begin to process it. And he started the article, I think, quite significantly to this point about the judge questioning his credibility as a journalist. In the lead of that Columbia Journalism article, which I'm not looking at right now, he says something to the effect of, I have spent my career telling the stories of other people. It is unnatural for me to be writing in the first person about myself, but sometimes it is necessary. And we agree that in his case, this first step at capturing his own story was absolutely necessary journalistically and emotionally for him, and that it also, I think, allowed him to then move into the fellowship process, thinking about how he re-enters the field after this is over. I mean, that is our goal, that he finishes the fellowship, that his asylum case is granted favorably, that he is allowed to stay in the United States, and that he can move out of this decade-long limbo that he has been in and resume his career and resume his life. And he's interested in so many things. We have a podcasting workshop that's going to be starting next week. He has signed up for that. He wants to learn about video editing, and he is interested in pursuing long-form writing, certainly to capture his own story, but also to return to telling the stories of others. And so I'm sure someone there can pull up the Columbia Journalism Review piece. I think it's significant to read, and I think as a document of what will eventually be several stories or a longer telling of what happened to him. I found it to be an interesting piece because you can see his mind beginning to work through what he and Oscar went through during those months in detention. And we've been talking about Emilio. I do want to mention Oscar too, and that Oscar is a very full member of our community in Ann Arbor and in the fellowship and at the university. Bill mentioned that Oscar is in the training program at Zingerman's, and which we're just thrilled about. And Zingerman's is a very socially conscious business, and they stepped up right away and welcomed Oscar fully and wrote a wonderful letter of support that we hope the court will read. But Oscar also is a full participant in the life of the fellowship. He comes to our seminars when he does not have a shift, and he's well known to all the fellows. And he was at the event with Maria Elena Salinas on Tuesday night, and he was there when our former fellow returned last night. And so we definitely feel that he is as much a part of our family as Emilio, and he also is healing through this experience as well.
Lynette, thank you so much. And so we've just been hearing from Lynette Clemenson. So I wanted to read something out of a filing that mentions Lynette. So this is a recent filing by the government that says, on October 3, the respondent submitted a proposed witness list to have Lynette Clemenson testify about the program she runs and give an update as to the respondent's progress in his fellowship. The department, this is our government, the department strongly opposes this testimony as it lacks relevance to the respondent's asylum claim. I think Lynette just put the lie to those words by the government. You just heard why the government is afraid to have Lynette testify in open court, because she speaks to the credibility of her program that has people from the New York Times, all kinds of other journalists. She can explain what the Columbia Journalism Review is and how important it is that Emilio published and was paid to publish like any other journalist. This is why the government does not want Lynette, because Lynette impeaches the judge's bad decision that Emilio is not a journalist. So thank you, Lynette, for being here today. I look forward to hearing you in open court in El Paso. And thank you for the context.
I really hope that when we arrive there next week in El Paso, and I have another member of our fellowship class, Luis Treyes, who's a reporter with Radio Ambulante and a colleague of Emilio's in the fellowship. He is coming with me to El Paso to offer support in the courtroom. And I really hope that Judge Howe allows me to speak. I mean, I think the part of it that's so distressing is the notion that this is all some flimsy ploy. You know, we have hundreds of journalists apply to this fellowship every year. Even though I was supporting the case, I could not have offered Emilio a Knight Wallace Fellowship without vetting his work. I spent time with the research that Molly Malloy did, going through the articles, verifying where he had worked, looking at his stories, figuring out how he would fit into our class, very carefully assessing what he wanted to do in the future because of the parameters of our fellowship. And I would not have extended the fellowship to Emilio. Even in support of his case, I would not have extended the fellowship to Emilio if he didn't meet the criteria of our very rigorous program. And so I know that Judge Howe has classified me as a, quote, so-called expert. I don't need to be classified as an expert. There are people in the room there for CPJ and other organizations that are, in fact, experts in different ways than I am. But I know journalism, and I know the work of journalists. I know the situation on the ground in Mexico, and I've very carefully vetted Emilio's credentials, his past work, and his future ambition. And I hope very much that, against the wishes of the government, that we are allowed to speak in Emilio's favor on October 22nd at this hearing.
Lynette, thank you. This is Andrea again. Could you tell us? Hi. Could you please just describe your experience before Judge Howe in August? Tell us what happened in the courtroom while you were there, and just sum up what your hope or expectation is from the coming hearing on October 22nd.
So there's not much to relate from that experience on August 16th. I had gone to El Paso, and Ed had entered my name as a potential witness simply to speak in Emilio's favor before we got on a plane to come to Michigan. I just wanted a chance to tell the judge about the program and to assure him that Emilio was exiting detention and on his way to a very serious pursuit at the University of Michigan. And so we entered the courtroom early, and there were several cases being heard that day. And so we took a seat, and with every other person who went up, the judge would start by asking that person if they had anyone in the courtroom with them. And most often it was a person's partner or spouse, and the person would acknowledge their family or supporters in the room with them, and then the judge would proceed to hear from the lawyer and from the person petitioning for asylum in that particular case. And there were a few of these that happened while we were sitting waiting for Emilio and Eduardo to be called up. And when it came time for Emilio to come up, the Judge Howe cleared the courtroom. He made us all leave, and he talked to Ed one-on-one. Of course, I wasn't there for that because we had been made to leave. But basically, he refused to allow me to be heard in the courtroom. And when we came back in and were allowed to be seated again, he simply jumped into asking questions of the lawyer and did not ask this question: do you have anyone in the courtroom here with you today? that question was never asked of Emilio, even though it was asked of every other person who went before us, which I found odd. And he wrapped up with Emilio very quickly. It seemed apparent that the judge felt that there was no other information that he needed to hear in Emilio's case, that he was quite familiar with it, that he had made up his mind. And he ended by saying that he would see them back in his courtroom on October 22nd. And, you know, I think we felt lucky that day that that Emilio and Oscar were allowed to leave the court and go to the airport and come to Michigan and start the program. But it felt like a very intentional amount of control in not allowing Emilio to have the voice support that other people in the courtroom had, and to allowing Emilio to come to Michigan, but making it very clear that there was this tether and that he held the ultimate control, and to keep us all, quite frankly, very anxious about what's going to happen on October 22nd. We gathered in the hallway as we were preparing to leave the court that day and saw Judge Howe leaving his personal office to return to chambers, and I tried to walk up to him just to introduce myself because I had no chance to speak to him in the courtroom, and he sort of waved his hand in my face and refused to acknowledge me and said he didn't talk to people outside of chambers. And I said, but you didn't allow me to talk to you in chambers. And he waved his hand at me and said, I won't talk to you, and walked into the courtroom. And so I suppose because of that encounter, perhaps I should not be hopeful that I will get a chance to speak on October 22nd. But we've submitted so many letters of support from Michigan, and we have done all of this translation work. I'm just hoping that he will look at everything submitted to him this week and rethink that decision and allow us to offer the support that he is allowing other people to have in the courtroom.
Lynette, thank you so much for that. That's illuminating, and we appreciate your time and your efforts, and we look forward to seeing you on October 22nd, and we hope that the judge will, in fact, to choose to hear the relevant details that you can add and should add to this case. I'd like to extend great thanks to Eduardo Beckett for being here today. Eddie, thank you so much for all that you have been doing. I'd like to extend more thanks. There are so many, as Eduardo mentioned, there's been a real community effort here, and we at the National Press Club appreciate that so very, very much. I would like to take a moment to thank a few people within the Press Club as well, especially Bill McCarran, the powerhouse behind this, who is our executive director. I'd like to thank our Press Freedom Fellow, Kathy Kiley. I'd like to thank Julie Hsu. I'd like to thank National Press Club Journalism Institute Executive Director, President of the Board, Barbara Cochran. I would like to thank Club and Institute staff, especially Lindsay Underwood, Joanne Booz, Crystal White. Huge thanks to Lynette Clementson, who just joined us on the phone from the University of Michigan. Thanks also to Penny Venettis at Rutgers and attorneys Steve Zansberg and Chuck Tobin. There are so many more people who have been involved with this, and I know I'm omitting many of you. I apologize, but really thank you all. Thank you to all of you who are working together to support our colleague, our friend, journalist Emilio Gutiérrez-Soto. I'd like to make just a few final comments before we wrap up. So this is the story of a good man who could have chosen to do anything with his life, but he chose journalism. He chose to tell the stories of others. He chose to tell the stories of people who were oppressed or powerless. He chose to tell stories about corruption because those are important things for people to know for their lives. And because of that, he had to flee. He had to flee the home that he loved, and he came here and asked for help. He came to the United States and asked us for help. He saved his son. He saved himself. He came here. He chose life. So now that life is right there. He's reaching for that life right now. And all that stands between that what he is reaching for, is a judge who's going to retire in 1 year, a judge who worked for ICE before he came to the bench, a judge who has profiled Emilio to stand for every criminal that's come through his courtroom, a judge whose deportation ruling hinged on 2 things. The first, that Emilio is not a journalist. So let me address that now, Your Honor. He is. Who thinks so? All the people that you heard from here today, the newspaper in Mexico that published hundreds of his stories, the people who read them, and you can read those stories now too. 19 journalism organizations, including the National Press Club, the Knight Wallace Foundation, which gave him this tremendously prestigious scholarship at the University of Michigan, the Columbia Journalism Review, where you can also find his byline. We have submitted dozens of letters of support, which the judge recently said he hasn't read. So this judge is not weighing the facts. He is sticking to what? He's sticking to a belief. In this judge is not acting as a judge. The second reason Judge Howe rejected asylum for Emilio is even nuttier. He says there's a program in Mexico that's going to protect him so his life wouldn't be in danger if he were deported to Mexico. Well, we heard today all about that program. Mexico, let me just reiterate, Mexico is toxically dangerous for journalists, especially Mexican journalists. They are killed at an alarming rate in the most brutal manner. We have submitted reports from the State Department, the United Nations, the U.S. Congressional Research Service, the Committee to Protect Journalists, Human Rights First, Reporters Without Borders, all top-notch organizations that paint a bleak picture of what life is like for journalists in Mexico. No one with any kind of reason or compassion could read these materials and send a hunted journalist back to Mexico to be killed. But this judge refused to read those materials, even though he was ordered to do so by the Bureau of Immigration Appeals. So he's pressing on, and he is determined to rule on October 22nd, it seems. He seems determined to punish someone who's not even in his courtroom. To Judge Howe, Emilio seems to be an archetype, the representation of every law-breaking, border-crossing criminal that has entered his courtroom over the course of his life on the bench. But I hope that we have established, beyond the shadow of a doubt, that Emilio is none of these things. Maybe Judge Howe is punishing Emilio because he's taken a dislike to him. Neither of these things are a viable reason. There is nothing here that says justice. Emilio has done nothing wrong. He's not broken any law. He has committed no crime. He is a father, he's a journalist, and he will make a great American. This judge has shown that he cannot rule, in this case, impartially. In this country, everyone has a right to a fair trial by a fair, independent, and impartial tribunal. We do not believe that Emilio can receive a fair trial in El Paso, Texas. Thank you, everyone, for being here today. Thank you for caring about this case. It's important. We will see you in El Paso. So there's one final thing that I'd like to do before we wrap up here today. Here at the National Press Club, we so appreciate all of the efforts that Eduardo Beckett has been making on behalf of our friend and colleague, journalist Emilio Gutiérrez-Soto. This work is on behalf of all journalists everywhere globally. This is for press freedom. This case counts. It stands for something. And we at the National Press Club want to let you know how much we appreciate you. So we are extending to you an honorary membership. This is your new membership number.
Thank you
Eddie,
so much.
you are one of us.
Thank you so much. It's an
We will see you upstairs at the bar. We are happy to have you here. Eddie, thank you.
honor. Thank you so much. I'm honored. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. I'm very honored to be here and humbled to be amongst such smart people like you guys. So thank you guys.
And I'm just happy to have such a tough cookie like Eddie on this case. Man, next time I'm stuck somewhere that I'm not supposed to be, I want this guy.
You're not allowed to have that.
Yeah. Thank you guys. Thank you.
Thank you, Eddie.